All right, everybody, welcome. I said I'd make a little video. This is Jeff. How's it going? I was thinking of making a little intro video to put some of the things I generally explain during a game before the game. It'd save a lot of time, and people could review it and watch it again. This is just Tabletop Simulator with the expansion installed. It's a nice way to play. It's not as fun as in person, in my opinion. It's kind of clunky. But it's great it looks great. It's very good for demonstrative purposes. So today, I'm going to assume if you're watching this, you've at least looked at or read the Getting Started rulebook. It helps with the super basics, just like how does combat work or how do you move ships. So take a look at that if you haven't already. Most of that is like basic space risk. You've ever played a board game stuff. That's not that hard. Today I'm going to go over some of the concepts that I'd put in the first category of how the heck do those work? I have no idea. So what are we going to talk about? We'll talk about currency. How do you use it? Like what do you do with the currencies? How do you actually move stuff, which is called system activation? And then finally, the super basics of faction abilities, tech, agents, and promissory notes. If you know those things before you play your first game, you might save yourself 3 hours of agony. I wish I would have known it my first game. Especially, there's a good chance we're playing an expansion game, which is just a lot more material. So, all right, we're going to get into that. So let's start. First one, currency. What are the currencies? Okay. I'll show you using a planet. So can I pick up these? I can't pick them up, but I'll show you anyway. Okay. So the first two are the easiest to wrap your head around. They are the currencies that involve all the planets you conquer. So these are just two random planets. They're pretty good, REM and Mirror. Now if you look here, I'm just going to zoom in so I can point. They have two numbers here. Each planet has. They have resources and they have influence. The first currency then is planets in general, but specifically resources and influence. They're used for different things, but broadly speaking, resources used to buy stuff, so especially plastic, which would be your ships and your ground forces. It's also used for other stuff like activating strategic cards. I'll explain those in a different video. Influence is generally used for more things that you'd think of as like political things. So it's used for voting. It's used for getting more actions. It's used for a lot of faction abilities. So, but generally speaking, with every planet, you can only use once. So you have to choose to use its resources or an influence. So this planet might be a little harder choice. Mir is really easy. I'll explain what that is later. It's a tech skip, and you have to tap. So you get a lot of influence, no resources. So you can't use this one for resources. So you're basically only using it for its influence or tapping it for its tech skip. So those are the first two resources. Not so far so good, right? Yes. Well, there's another one that's a slightly more complicated. It's called commodities and trade goods. And you're like, Jeff, what the heck are those? Okay. They're actually the same little chit if you just saw me flip them. But let me show you on a faction sheet, because it'll look just like this in person. Okay. So look here. So commodities are basically something your faction has so many of, they're useless to you. You start with none, but when somebody plays the trade card, again, I'll explain those later, and it was in the core rules if you read it, you get 4 commodities. You can easily get them. Somebody can just give them to you, but you can't use them. The only way to make commodities useful is to trade with someone else. So once you trade with someone else, their commodities become your trade goods. That's great. What do trade goods use for? Basically anything. You can buy, you can use them as resources, you can use them as influence, you can buy other players with them. I'm not even kidding, like you can trade them to other players as well. They're also a victory point condition, but again, we'll talk about victory points in another video. What do you have to pay attention for with those? So these are very versatile. They never go bad, unlike planets, which I'll show you a planet card. Here you go. Every turn you use a planet, you have to tap it, just like Magic or any other card game. But once the next turn comes, you unflip it. So you can use your planets once a turn with exceptions. However, resources, trade goods basically are unlimited, and you can use them whenever you like. And pretty much the only thing you can't use them for, there's a political phase in the game where you get a vote. They do not count as votes. Yeah, and so it's interesting. But this is another layer of currency, which makes it a little confusing. Now, you're like, Jeff, that's already 2. There's more? Yes. The third layer of currency is these things. They're called command tokens. And everybody starts with 3 in tactic, 3 in fleet, 2 in strategy. Now, these are, I also call currency. They're finite. Most factions get 2 a turn, and you have to use them to do things. I'll explain. But generally, tactics are board actions. Fleet is the literal size of your fleet. Let me get. So, and fleet counts non-fighters. So any of these big ships you are, if I have 3 fleet, I can only have 3 ships in one system. If I have a 4th, immediately on the entering of that 4th ship, I have to kill a ship. Oops. So this is very important too, fleet capacity. And finally, strategic. This is almost always the secondary of strategic cards. But sometimes will be faction abilities. Generally speaking, though, this is a very finite currency. It's your actions in the game and how many ships you get. You might not think of it as a currency, but it most definitely is. So this is something to keep in mind. All right. Now you might be like, okay, that's it, right? Command tokens. We've got 3/4 currencies already. We're done, right? Not quite. There's one more thing I would also call a currency. Let me show you. Which they never get explained very well to a new player. And I'm getting them out right now. These are your promissory notes. Everybody gets these. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 normally. 4 without the expansion, and 5 with the expansion. And then every faction, I'm Creus in this example, the ghost guys, and you can tell the little symbol at the bottom there, has their own faction note. These are basically things you trade away to another player that fundamentally harm you, but they're binding. There's nothing you can do to get rid of these. So for example, trade agreement. Remember we talked about trade goods? When you're this one is really basic, so it's a good one to start with. When you're, so I'm the white player here. White player gives you all of his commodities, then return this card to the white player. So basically you promise someone, hey, don't kill me, or give me this, and next time my commodities come back, you'll get them all. Now, why is this a big deal with ghosts? 4 is a lot. The average is 3. A lot of factions have 2. 4 is a hefty amount of trade goods. So if, say somebody was trying to harass my border, I could give them this, and then next time I refresh my commodities, they get all of them. Pretty good, right? Their faction card is just places a wormhole, which mostly helps the ghost player. So normally you pay somebody to do this for you. The most important, the rest of them, is this one. Support for the throne. You give away 1 victory point. My goodness. But if that person attacks you, not if I attack them, you can attack them all you want if you gave this away. If they attack you, they have to give your victory point back. This one can make and break the game. Very edgy card. One just says you can't vote, political secret, fine. The other big one is Ceasefire. It basically is a way to prevent somebody from attacking you. So to get rid of the Ceasefire, so basically you can't attack them. This is a big deal. Unless you waste a token, and then you get the Ceasefire back. An alliance just gives away your, I think gives away your commander ability. Let's see. Yep, you can use my commander's ability. Also quite powerful. So these are a currency too. You can trade 1 a turn on your turn with somebody else. So you can trade 1 for 1, or 1 for something else. These are another currency. So that's what I would put in the, broadly speaking, currency categories. All right, now related to this, I wanted to kind of get into how do we use these things? Like if we got all these currencies, how do I do things like build? And to be honest with you, building is one of the ideas in this game that is one of the more difficult. And I will show you how building's done. All right, so here's my home system. To build, firstly, you need a space dock. Now, like every other rule in this game, there's vast amounts of exceptions. But let's start basic. We'll be the ghost, and we'll use their home system to build. So almost always to build, there's one section we'll get into later. How do you build? Well, and this will also explain how system activation works. You get one of your tactics, you drop it on a system. So this is my action for an action turn. All right, and the last thing you do in the phase, by the way, is here. If you look here, tactical actions. You do all these things. You activate, you move, you fight, you invade, you build. So build's the last thing you do. But what does build mean? So remember we talked about resources. Hey, look, I have 4 resources. I could use my 4 resources to build 4 points worth of things. How do I know what things are worth? Look at this sheet here. It shows you cost. So, 3 for a carrier, 4 for a dreadnought, 8 for your flagship, 2 for a cruiser, 1 for a destroyer, 1 for 2 fighters, 1 for 2 infantry, and you can't buy those ones. It's a strategy card. So let's build. Let's do an example. So this is Krios early game, and if you don't know anything about them, they move really fast. So why not double down on fast ships? Not a bad idea, however. Generally speaking, round 1, you want more carriers. I only have 1 carrier. That sucks. I want another carrier. How much carriers cost? 3. Great. Let's say I'm going to want to buy a carrier. But I had 4 points, right? That means I could get 1 more thing. Generally speaking, round 1, you always want to get infantry, so you can invade more planets. So let's see here. That would be 2 infantry. All right. Now there's another rule here that will not come into play that's very important for production. It's basically production capacity. How do you know your production capacity? Here. It tells you here. This unit's production value is equal to 2 more than the resource value of the planet. Production value means how many pieces of plastic you're allowed to build. So you have to worry about currency, like how much resources you spend, plus production value. So my planet is 4 and the space dock is 2. That means the Krios can build 6 pieces of plastic, no more. I built 3. I'm totally within my limit, right? So I pay my planet and I get to move my ships here. That's how production works. Pretty easy. Now we get into the issue of how do we move? Well, let's say it's the next turn and I want to invade somewhere. Movement works like this. Activation's pretty easy. You just drop, because here's my home system here. I want to conquer here. I drop this tile. Now you just follow the order of operations on this little sheet. So you activate, I did that, and this will all be 1 move, and then the next guy moves, and we go around in a circle. You move ships, and see if you get shot at. Well, this is an empty system, so it's pretty easy. I move here, and I bring 2 of my infantry with me. Now, and probably a fighter. Now, if you're like, how'd you do that, Jeff? Well, let's look. So we look down here what my carriers can do. It has 1 move, 4 capacity. It means it can carry 4 infantry, mechs, or fighters. Yeah. Now, you might say, Jeff, you moved 2. How did you do that? Well, I have a faction ability here, which we'll talk about in another video. During the tactical actions, apply +1 to the move value of each of your ships that start movement in your home system or in a wormhole. So I always get +1 out of a wormhole, otherwise I could never leave my home system. And then I have a tech that every time I move a ship, an extra ship gets a +1. So technically this ship can move +2. So I could go 1, 2, 3. By the way, my next ship would do that, right? You go 1, 2, 3, capture, you're right next to the middle of the map. So once you're here, you follow order operations. So I'm stuck here. What's next? Space combat, there's no fighting. Invasion, we can invade the planet. And you always would invade each planet. Why not? And then now with the expansion, this has gotten more complicated. In the old days, you used to just get the planet cards. I don't know where the planet cards are here. I'll have to look for them. Planet cards. Oh, here they are. So you find your planet cards, and you put them tapped into your space. I'll even look for them. What do we got? Aranam and Mir. All right. Let's grab them. Aranam. Mir. Bang. So I got these 2 cards. They're now mine. And in real life, you physically grab them, right? You move into your play area, right next to that planet I just built with. And they're tapped. They come in tapped, just like land and magic. But then next turn, I can use them for their resources, influence, and tech skip. Isn't that nice? And that's the basics of how you move. It gets way more complicated as we fight and such. But once there's a token in a space that's your token, everything's locked until the next turn, aka until the whole next turn. And I'll explain strategy cards later. This is really good to know. All right, so this is the first basic video. I'm probably going to make at least 2 more. I'm going to make 1 on faction abilities and 1 on strategy cards. and maybe one more on tech. If you know those, I feel like you'd get a decent grasp on the game. But yeah, we'll stop here. Hopefully it was helpful, everybody. I'd like to use these in the future when we bring in more new people, help explain just very fundamental basics. So all right, thanks for watching.